The next thing that we're going to do is move along to removing all of our lug nuts and then the wheel. Now that the wheel's out of the way, let's go ahead and remove our axle bolt right here. Take a punch and a hammer, come right inside where the axle is and break it free from the bearing. With the axle bolt out of there, the next thing we're going to do is come right underneath where the control arm is. I want to apply some upward pressure to this control arm to hold the ball joint stud still while I remove the nut. Remove that nut. Relieve the pressure from under your control arm. Okay, let's just go ahead and leave that nut on there, a couple threads. Now I'm just going to slide the axle out of the way. I'm going to take my nice long punch and a hammer, and I'm going to give this a couple loving bonks to try to break the ball joint free from the knuckle. Once you have it broken free, remove your nut. Take a pry bar. We're going to come in between the subframe and the control arm, carefully pull it down, and then pull this away from the vehicle. Let's take the axle, we're going to pull it right out of that bearing, and we'll slide it aside. It's a good idea to take a bungee cord, tie it around the axle so it can't go anywhere. I'm just going to strap it up to this coil spring right here. Now let's get underneath the car. Now from underneath the car, let's go ahead and remove our shield that comes underneath here. You're going to find a whole bunch of mounting bolts, 2 across the rear, 2 in the center right here, and then 3 across the front. Remove them all. Should be one here and on the other side. With that out of the way, we can continue on to removing the axle from the transmission. You want to make sure you have a collection bucket located right underneath it because there's always the possibility fluid could come out. Be careful as you pry this away. There it is, friends. With the axle out of the way, the next thing you want to do is inspect the seal where the axle goes into the transmission. Make sure it's in good condition. Make sure you don't see any leaks. If it looks like it needs to be replaced, now's the time to do it. You also want to make sure you clean out the center area of your bearing. Okay, friends, now it's time to install the front axle. Let's go ahead and slide that into the transmission. Let's use our rubber mallet and go ahead and give this a loving bonk. Okay. You definitely want to make sure that that's all the way in, seated up against the transmission. After that, go ahead and grab onto this portion of the axle and give it a nice tug. You want to make sure that it's completely seated and it won't separate. Let's apply some copper never seize into the splined area of the bearing. Now let's carefully grab onto this, and we're going to do 2 things at the same time. Essentially, I want to make sure that I line the axle up with the bearing hole, and at the same time, I need to be able to pry down on this control arm so I can start the ball joint into the knuckle area where the ball joint belongs. The next thing that we're going to do is tighten up our ball joint nut. What you're probably going to notice when you try to tighten it is that the stud is going to spin inside of the knuckle. To help prevent that, I'm just going to carefully put something underneath the control arm to apply gentle pressure inside of the knuckle area here to prevent that stud from spinning. Okay, now I have this bottomed out. We're going to want to torque this to 52 foot-pounds, but as you can tell, the axle's kind of in the way to be able to do that. So what I'm going to do is just try to make it as snug as possible. And then I'll give it a couple loving bonks with my rubber mallet along the wrench here, just to help make sure it's set. Relieve the pressure from under your control arm. Now let's get our axle bolt in there. It's recommended to make sure that you use a brand new bolt, and I like to use a little bit of red thread locker. Let's bottom this out, then we'll torque it to 26 foot-pounds, and then we'll turn it an additional 90 degrees. To be able to torque this, you're going to notice that this is going to want to spin. I just use a pry bar coming straight across the studs down to the ground to prevent it from spinning. Now for the additional 90 degrees, I'm going to start with my ratchet straight up and down, and I'm going to bring it so it's at approximately 3 o'clock. Remove your lug nut. Let's go ahead and get our splash shield up there. And of course, if you have your center bolts, make sure you put those in as well. Now we're just going to bottom out these bolts. Now we can get the wheel back up on here. We'll snug it up, get the wheel back on the ground, and then we'll torque it to manufacturer's specifications. With the wheel on the ground, let's torque these to 81 foot-pounds. Torqued. Okay friends, that job's in the books. What's left to do now? Take it for a road test down to your local alignment shop.